Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. Now, because you've all been good and there's a holiday coming up, I have a surprise for you. It's William Peter Blatty week. Today, Adam Barken, who's a writer and producer on the very fun sci-fi show Killjoys, which starts its third season this Friday on Syfy in the US and Space in Canada, dives into Blatty's first directorial effort, The Ninth Configuration. And then on Friday, another guest will tackle Blatty's Exorcist III in a special bonus episode. Produced a decade apart, the two films act as mirrors of one another, allowing Blatty to return to the theological questions he first raised in the original Exorcist script, but in radically different packages. It's fascinating stuff, and I hope you'll enjoy the thematic double-dipping. So, The Ninth Configuration. Made in 1980 under the title Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane, and initially released in a handful of different cuts, Blatty's directorial debut is pitched as a psychological thriller starring Stacy Keach as an American psychologist who arrives at a remote military asylum to treat patients traumatized by the Vietnam War, only to find himself pulled into a series of absurd philosophical debates and a production of Dog Hamlet on his way to a surprising epiphany. It's very much of its time, but it's also eerily timeless, as all the great existential questions inevitably are, and it features a fantastic supporting cast, which we will discuss over the course of the episode. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, it was partly timing, right? Because when you had reached out to me to ask, do I want to come do it? Which I was like, yeah, absolutely. Blatty had just passed away recently. And so, that affected me way more than I expected, because while I had certainly grown up with, as a young kid reading The Exorcist and obsessively watching the movie and being weirded out by 2 and then happy again with 3, I didn't realize the extent to which he had been a big part of my growing up. And actually, Ninth Configuration, though, was one of the big ones. And again, I hadn't thought about it that much until he died, and I was kind of going back over it and realizing, I came to Ninth Configuration in kind of classic 80s way, in that it was like a bootleg videotape that was given to me. I was in a theater class, and we were supposed to come up with a play, and at the time, I was obsessed with that point. My favorite movie in the world was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I just thought it was everything you ever wanted in a movie, because apparently at that point I didn't need women. So I was like, it was fine. There were
positive versions.
Exactly, right? So it was just, they're either ball breakers or I guess hookers, but it's men who have to work the shit out. So thankfully I got past that. But at the time that certainly was an incredibly powerful movie. So I remember in this group we were in, I was saying, let's just do a thing where we can all do crazy we'll all be in an insane asylum. We'll all have monologues. And so one of the guys was really into it, and he said, I have this great monologue about whether Hamlet is crazy or not, or whether he's pretending to be crazy. And he riffed it out, and I was like, oh my God, that's the most amazing thing. He's like, yeah, I totally ripped it off from this movie. I was like, what movie is that? And he said, oh, dude, you have to see this. And he gave me, an ELP recording of something he got off of First Choice Super Channel, with the tracking line through half of it. And it was actually a perfect way to watch it. And I just remember putting on the movie, and it just blew my hair back. I was at that age. I was, I guess, 12 or 13, and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. But yet it was I was like, oh, it's like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But then there's this weird religious stuff. So I understood, oh, this is the guy who did The Exorcist. So I get that. I kept waiting for the monsters, right? And then, but they didn't come, and yet it was still so compelling. And it reminded me stylistically of as I would just started to watch this Robert Altman guy. And the way the sound worked in the movie made me go, oh, it reminded me of that. So it was this wonderful... And then it ends with one of the world's greatest fight scenes, right? Where he just kicks the shit out of every single biker, apparently, in the world, and which is also great. So it always stuck with me. And then when Blatty died, and I was kind of listening to a lot of retrospectives and people talking, it really struck me more than I think I'd ever really thought about how it fits within The Exorcist, Exorcist III, and this as this kind of trilogy of faith.
Yeah.
And I thought, and watching it again, I've watched it now, I think 3 times since we talked, and again, just being struck by, again, how weird it is, but also how beautiful and how much it is a very interesting wrestling of a faithful man with the question of doubt.
Yeah.
And evil, which I think was something great that Blatty did. But what it also did, that I loved, was that it's the only one of his movies, it feels like, that actually also let you see how funny he was.
Yeah. I was explaining this to Kate just the other day. It's like, oh, well, he wrote a Pink Panther movie. He was a comic writer.
He's a comedy guy.
Yeah, and if you read his books, there's a really dry kind of almost like Borscht Belt engagement with philosophy and
totally,
Yiddish riffing thing that goes on. It's fascinating to me that he would make 3 movies that are long philosophical arguments that also have this genre aspect to them, where you can say, oh no, they're horror movies about the question of faith, and they're the greatest trick in The Exorcist is that the devil just wants to make you uncertain. And then it brings it all back around again at the end of Exorcist III with Kinderman arguing that if there's a devil, there must be a God, which there's absolutely no proof for in any of his movies, but that's the faith part. That's like these weird arguments of, I don't have to believe in God, I believe in you. And then smack in the middle is Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane, this bizarre little thing he did for a studio that I think went bankrupt before it even released.
Oh yeah, I was trying to follow it. It's fascinating, the whole and him rewriting it and writing it, and then
different cuts, different versions, different interpretations. He would even argue. Apparently, there was a screening. I'm trying to remember when this was, in 2005 or 2006, where they ran the wrong print, and he was like, nah, that was okay. He's fine with whatever, because that's the point of the movie. It's just open to whatever interpretation you want to apply. It's
obviously not a movie made by a guy who was precious with every single frame, right? He felt like if you get the gestalt of it, it's there. I mean, I love the fact that I only learned from listening to a podcast about it, was that it was basically financed, I think, by Coke. Or by somebody.
That's right. It was one of the early TV deals.
Yeah, exactly.
It was supposed to be, I think it was the thing that became TriStar Pictures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so something like that. And so I know they had here's your money. Yeah. Make your movie.
Put a Coke machine in the corner.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
And which was perfect. And it's the only way you could make a movie like this. Like, I was actually watching it again last night, and I was watching with my son. Who is not really big into genre, but who was into comedy more. And so but it was funny, after about 10, 15 minutes into it, I was like, what do you think? And he was like, I like it, but I don't understand what kind of movie this is.
Yeah.
And I realized it's really true that, until you get to the end, you can't really tell. There's no moment where you're like, okay, now it's the bank heist. Or, okay, well, now it's the part where he rides out to get the girl. Or now it's the part where the children have to save their parents. It's like, it never settles down. I think it was Kermode himself who said, it was like a film made by a person who doesn't seem to know what films are. Or something. I'm sure I'm mangling the quote, but
whatever
it's like,
you want it to be. Right?
Exactly,
whatever he wants it to be.
Yeah, which is incredibly liberating, and I find it now. It's funny in that it's not so much that I can look at my own work and necessarily see, I see how where I got that from, say where there's certain or how that's affecting me as a writer, and yet I go back and look at it. It captures something that I think any writer and filmmaker wants to capture, which is just life. Like, he just found something, and I just go along with that journey the entire time.
Yeah, and it is the sense of kind of busyness to it that I'm always surprised by how many characters there are, because I remember the whole thing.
I know,
but every time I watch, it's like, oh, that's right, he's in this, and there's a speech about the foot, and all this stuff that's just...
I had the moment the first time I rewatched it just a few weeks ago where I was like, oh my god, Joe Spinell's in this.
Yeah.
And he's playing the most un-Joe Spinell, Willie Chichi, and the guy from Maniac is like this quiet, dumpy little. He is what's his face's dog's body. He's Exorcist Father Karras.
Yeah, Jason Miller.
Thank you, Jason Miller. He's his long-suffering assistant who's trying to collect his dogs for his all canine Hamlet.
Which, again, is something that I know Blatty pitched. You can just feel it. That this is a thing that he worked in. He'd been trying to do his all-canine Hamlet joke for 50 years, and there it is.
Yeah.
This is his shot.
Yeah.
It's like it wasn't his first feature. It was his first film as a director.
I believe so, yeah.
But he'd been working in the industry for 20, 25 years, and you just get the sense that he'd been stockpiling.
Yes.
All these little ideas, all these conversations he was having with people on sets, and it all just gets baked in.
Yeah.
In this, I tried to describe it to somebody once. It's like, imagine going into the Star Wars cantina
Okay, yeah.
And you can't quite understand the music, and everybody's talking in different languages,
Yeah.
but it's just, people in English.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense until you really listen to it and you feel it out.
Yes.
And even then, I'm still not sure.
Oh, it's still, I was watching, again, it's always interesting to watch it with your kids, because you can kind of see things, you imagine what it's like through their eyes, and just wondering which of the jokes made any sense,
Yeah.
which they even realized were jokes, right? Because there's so many riffs and so many, and I mean, Scott Wilson is just incredible in it. It's just like every line is a joke, is a pun, is an attack, is something very serious, or even the jokes are said with such a deadpan seriousness. Like, it's a bizarre, wonderful performance. And an incredible role that actually has, and that was what really struck me watching it again, because you want to say this movie's a mess or whatever, but his journey is very clear, as is Kane's, right?
Yeah,
It is actually very clear, decent storytelling of, and getting to the point where when the final revelation of why won't you go to the moon is revealed, it's not a particular surprise, but it's certainly, you can see why it took him this long to get there. And when he finally gets there, there is that feeling of catharsis and release. So that's what I think I love about it, is that it's funny, almost against what Kermode said. Like, I think it's that case of somebody who'd worked in the industry and who's just such a great storyteller for so long, gave himself the license to look like he was throwing everything away. Mm-hmm. But what he ended up with was still a very compelling story that still gave you a journey that you were always looking for. It didn't feel like somebody who didn't know how to make a movie. It was just somebody who stopped worrying about what the right thing was supposed to be.
Yeah, there's no regard for convention.
Yeah.
There is exposition, but it's not delivered the way it should be.
Yeah.
In any other film, it would have been different.
Yep.
And for anyone else,
Yeah.
it would be different.
Yeah.
Which I think is why the film has such a strange position, not just in Blatty's filmography, but just in general, in
Yeah.
the canon. I mean, people, you either love it or you don't know what to do with it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're very Catholic in your film tastes, then this is that. This is the thing that kind of pulls it all together in a really strange way and just comes at you from a new direction, or packages something very familiar in an extremely I don't even know what the right word is. I was going to say outre, but that's not right either. It's a weird box.
Yeah.
It's a weird box that he put all this stuff in.
And that's, I think, the thing, right? Is that what's always exciting is seeing somebody take a whole bunch of disparate elements that you don't think work, and then out of it, that was what I always remember thinking of The Matrix. What made The Matrix remarkable was that they took all these things that we'd seen in a bunch of different places and made something unique out of it by jamming these things all together, by taking Gibson and Kung Fu and anime and Art Deco and all these different things. And in Ninth Figuration, while certainly not as, immediately accessible, it was because I was struck last night by, okay, yes, on one hand you can go, I don't know where this movie's going. On the other hand, again, the more movies you watch, I started to go, but this also fits fairly squarely in with a very particular type of subgenre of 70s filmmaking, which I would call like the men dealing with the trauma of war and mostly Vietnam.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? That it fit within the MASH, Catch-22. Right. I mean, even in a weird way, you could say that although it was certainly more counterculture, but just the trauma of that was at the core of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that was very much within that. It's a Dirty Dozen, right?
Yeah,
these stories in which men are kind of all shoved together and are dealing with war, and it's breaking them down, and the lunacy of it is breaking them down. So it's very much within that, and then it takes from all these disparate out, and then it's got all that weird anarchic humor that also came from theirs, but that was certainly in the ether there, and then it turns into Rolling Thunder at the end, and then it kind of becomes this amazing. I was watching that scene last night and kind of going, because I remember as a kid being blown away by it because it's just Stacey Keach kicking the shit out of people, and it's such a funnily. I don't know if I want to say American take on Jesus, because they're by no means the only ones who imagine avenging Jesus. Right. But it's just such a great...
It's a specifically American milieu for Jesus.
I think that's what... Yes, exactly. And the idea that... Because it's very interesting... Again, Blatty is very precise in his decisions. While it certainly can look anarchic, at the same time when you watch it, he shows up... So Stacey Keach you get to the point in the story, obviously, where he and Scott Wilson have been battling over, is there a God, is there not a God? Scott Wilson's thing is clearly, I want to believe, but you got to prove it to me. And Keach's perspective, Kane's perspective, while he's still believing that he is Hudson Kane as opposed to the killer, is, I believe because, we said, because there is evil in the world, I believe there must be a counterforce. And also there are great examples of sacrifice in the world. But of course, what Wilson throws back at him as well, give me a real example. And I was struck by that watching it again because and he can't, what's interesting. And at first I was like, oh, is it because it's not possible? Or is it because literally this man doesn't know who he is?
Right.
And so he is unable to go back past, a week or two. So he's unable to. So then he gets to, once his identity is revealed, and off goes Scott Wilson. I love the fact that they're all supposedly locked up in this place, and the minute Scott Wilson has a temper tantrum, he just hops in a car, drives through the guard barrier, and gets to a bar and drinks his face off.
Well, that's the honor system for you. In the
there
70s,
you go, right?
It was easier.
With the weirdest biker gang in movies. It is like every straight-laced parent's fear, right? It's a bunch of, tough bikers, but they're also kind of leather queens. Although, here's a fascinating beat that you might want to check out again. Okay. So, you got your lead, there's Stanley, and Stanley is the big buff guy. Who, when he pulls off, he's wearing the kerchief, the Charles Nelson Riley kerchief, and when he pulls off the sunglasses, very painted eyes. His buddy, who looks more like your standard biker, is, you're thinking, okay, well, he's like the straight one, until he attempts to rape Scott Wilson. So, okay, clearly some problematic, my least favorite word, but, views on whatever, except that there is this one shot that I swear, and it's a very you come into the bar, everyone's going crazy, and they show a guy sitting at the bar, and I swear he is meant to be the straight-laced gay guy at the bar, not impressed with these youngsters.
That's right.
He's got like this with the wood beads and the sweater, and he's sitting there, and again, I mean, I'm maybe making assumptions, and yet because it's so clear that those bikers represent some horrible example of violence and sexuality gone completely anarchic.
Right.
The fact that character is also there and looking disapprovingly is a very interesting moment. Yeah. And one that I think at least sets up an ambiguity, right? So in comes Stacy Keach into this pit of hell and tries his best to be Jesus. And so it's a fascinating scene because at this point you want him. You know that he's Killer Kane. You know that he can kick ass. So you're just ready to come in there, punch all the bikers, and walk out. And what he's trying to do is save Scott Wilson. And the bikers go through this ritual, and it's a very ritualistic moment of denigrating this guy, right? And it's basically very much a renounce your God, renounce your faith. And they pick a very, at the time, American take on it, which is renounce the U.S. Marine Corps. Right, yeah. And right, so they say, you're going to say Marines suck. And they play it like, oh, there's no way. And then he says it, and, Stanley gets very upset. He's like, oh, I'm trying to screw you up. And then he's like, to the point where they get him on the ground, and it's like, lick up this beer. At the point Stanley does these incredible splits to drop the beer down. So again, like, very, very weird.
He has a secret life.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there's
right?
something else going on.
Absolutely, right? And it's wonderful. And so he's down there, and he forces him, at which point, but he completely debases himself, and Stacy Keach licks the beer off the floor. At which point the partner says, they start beating him up for disrespecting the Corps, because these bikers are not very consistent with their feelings, obviously, on American icons.
Yeah, they have an undeveloped ethos.
Yes, you could say. Exactly right. It seems to be. But it's the moment, of course, when they pin down Scott Wilson and attempt to orally rape him, that then it literally turns into The Coward of the County. It's Dog Named Sue. It is a boy named Sue. It is that is and Keach is just so wonderful. Literally, it's like, oh, you can do shit to me. You can make me say stuff, but not that little child. At which point he gets out. It's such a great... It's just the shot of Stanley standing there with the beer in his hand and Keach's hand coming out of frame and grabbing it, and the moment of, what? He's squeezing, smashes the glass in his hand, and then it's on. And then it's Rolling Thunder, and he's kicking the shit out of everybody, which, again, was such a standard thing in those kind of 70s movies, right? From Taxi Driver to Rolling Thunder to all this, it's
it's an exploitation movie. Like
exactly.
It's a classic Corman thing from even 5 years before Taxi Driver.
Yeah, absolutely right. Billy Jack, it's, now, right, now, fuck it. Now, the ex-soldier is going to make you pay for what you done. And so all of that stuff all thrown together in a story, and then, the reveal that after he does all this, that he has taken a knife in his gut, but will not reveal that, so that he can, in a sense, his death be the thing to prove to Scott Wilson that, there is a sacrifice to be made. It's bonkers, but it's wonderful, and I'm just so grateful that a software company had the money to throw to him to say, here, make this movie and do it however you want to make it.
Yeah. And for all of its just insane genre-defying, incoherent choices, which aren't incoherent, they just don't line up with what we think is going to happen.
Yeah.
There's no question that this is exactly the movie Blatty wanted to make.
Yes.
That's what fascinates me.
Yeah.
It is, as you were saying, it's not a disregard. It's just a different priority.
Yeah.
This is where he wants to go, and this is how he needs to do it.
Yeah.
And watching it the first time, and I saw it in very similar circumstances, actually.
Oh, yeah?
I was on, it was panned and scanned. It was on pay TV.
Yep.
And it was an alien experience. Because, right then we were watching movies. I think the thing that was before it was Blue Thunder.
Right. Exactly.
It was a much slicker world by the time it finally surfaced.
Absolutely.
And it was already a relic. It was only 4 or 5 years old, but it was out of time.
Yeah, and it's like, what's Mike Hammer doing here without a mustache, right? That was my reaction. I was like, really? What's going on?
And Stacey Keach, and again, you can't say enough about Keach because he commits so fully and gives a performance. My greatest regret, I interviewed him once for... It must have been for Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
It was a phoner, and we just didn't have enough time because I wanted to ask him about that. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask everything about that.
Yeah.
We talked about it very briefly, and he said, oh, that was a fun picture. It's like, no, come on, there's more. No, I know there's more. What else did you conjure? What did you do? Because it's a performance that is absolutely in tune with the movie's tone.
Yep.
And that is something that I would imagine is impossible.
Yes.
This guy's a veteran of movies. He's made dozens television episodes. He's steeped in this production culture.
Yep.
And here he somehow has shifted gears into whatever it is Blatty's doing. They are absolutely simpatico.
Yeah.
And this comes out. And how do you get there? How do you talk everybody else into making this thing that you have in your head when it is literally without precedent?
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that the one thing that maybe they had going for them in that in the subgenre that it was in, of the crazies, and is the guy running it crazier than all of them, right, is that you can, in a sense, you like every single character could be given imagine it's your movie,
right,
and then perform that way. So I mean, Robert Loggia's performance, let's talk about that. It is bonkers, wonderful. And he acts as if he is the star of his movie, right? Like he is, there's this amazing story about this guy, and who sings in blackface and then is obsessed with his, flying belt, and, just the tonal shifts that he does in one scene is incredible. And you could see that all Blatty would have to do is, here's your guy, I've written you some stuff. I don't know if there was any improv on, but if there was, it was go with it. And all everybody has to do is just maintain what they're all coming in a sense from different movies, right? Mm-hmm. Because then you have Ed Flanders,
right?
And I mean, I just want to take a moment. Flanders, it's the classic Flanders role, right? He did the exact same role in Exorcist III.
St. Elsewhere.
St. Elsewhere,
Just
like
this compassionate, soft,
wry, but it's kind of sardonic, kind of, but the wise guy, the guy who's always like you want to be with because he's going to be like, hey, watch this, let's watch this crazy thing going on. And yet, in those key moments when the emotion comes out, you can believe he's also a tormented guy. So again, it's like he is this guy in a weird way who is the audience surrogate, who allows you to look at how everybody else is, and it's a completely different style of performance from what Keach is giving, who walks in straight off a German expressionistic film, right? Like it is a silent movie performance, right? Like it is almost like you don't need that dialogue, and it's amazing to watch that shift from, I think the two scenes that I was watching this night that really struck me, there was the scene with the hammer, where one of the guys is bashing the wall because he was trying to resituate his atoms so that he could walk through the wall. Took a running leap at it, didn't work, so he's using the hammer now to let the wall know who's boss, but it's not going through either, and Stacy Keach is very quiet and says, I think maybe it's the issue is the properties with the hammer. Why don't you just let me take this and I will get back to you. And it works, and it calms him down. And then as things are deteriorating later and he's allowed all the boys to dress up like they're in The Great Escape, and he has this wonderful scene where Groper, the poor hapless sergeant who's trying to run the whole thing, walks in a Nazi uniform, of an age where clearly this man was probably a vet.
Right. And
so wearing a Nazi uniform was against everything for him. And Keach is in the midst of having one of his breakdowns, and he has this scene where he tells him, you are going to wear this uniform, you are going to keep it clean, or by God, you will die in it. And it is terrifying. It is again, Stacy Keach, man, when he turns it on, is incredible. And it's just, to be able to go from like 0 to 100 like that, it's, like you said, it's how he managed to pull out that performance amidst all this lunacy is remarkable. But he becomes this incredible, centrifugal force that everyone can kind of spin around. It's amazing.
Yeah. And they couldn't have shot it in sequence. There's just no way. Not with that cast, right? They must have had people off on days and in and out. And
I don't know. Again, I found there was one podcast, I can find you the name for it after if you want, and if listeners want to look, because it was a really good retrospective from a group of horror fans. And as I understood it, well, I don't know sequence-wise, it was, I think, a case of like, we got 6 weeks in a castle in Hungary.
Well, I suppose that's true. Once they're there, they're there.
Exactly. And I think it was just a case of things got crazy, and they all went a little nuts, making their weird-ass movie. And there were some... the original... You know who the original Killer Kane was.
I'm not sure that it was a Saracen, or am I thinking something
Nicole Williamson.
I did not know that.
Yes. And now the story of why he was no longer in the movie seems to have changed over history, whether it was a case of he couldn't do it and Keach came in, whether he was kicked out, whether there's a story that he was involved in a altercation at his hotel in which he ended up throwing much of the hotel furniture out a window because the phone wasn't working. He was a notorious guy, Nicole Williamson, and so... or the fact that he was not working out, as other people have said, that he just didn't do a great American accent and wasn't Killer Kane.
Yeah, it just seems like a real... For as much admiration as I have for Williamson, he shouldn't play that role.
It doesn't seem possible. It's one of those things where you say, I don't understand how that is.
He's a smaller man.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Kind of more oval in shape.
He was but apparently he was a friend of Blatty, so Blatty wanted him in. And so it's why... when the studios forced him to put that horrible, stupid exorcism part of The Exorcist III, shoving that into it, he ended up going with Nicole Williamson, who understood, I'm going to do you a favor, we're going to get through this, it's going to be okay. Right. So he was the original one, and I guess that he ended up leaving, and then so that's the other... Keach was parachuted in. But again,
there's no one more American for that, like that role. Why would that's so bizarre? I'm wrestling with, okay, is it because he's so good that I can't imagine anybody else, or is Nicole Williamson just a really wrong choice? And I think it's a mixture of both.
I couldn't. I mean, there is that thing where you kind of I'm always happy that we have some of those visions of those dailies of Eric Stoltz in Back to the
yeah.
Future, because you go, and I really am a huge admirer of Stoltz, and yet you watch that and you go, yeah, no.
Right.
He was not, they were right. He was not the right guy for that role. He was just, he wasn't getting it. I would love to have seen some stuff of Williamson, just to, like, I wonder, because absolutely, like, how would he have pulled that off? It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I imagine his character would be better at being reserved.
Yes.
But...
And he could certainly do, I mean, look, he was crazy. Like, I mean, as far, like, he could certainly bring on the crazy, right?
Sure, but...
So, it might have been that case of, like, because timing-wise, I'm trying to think of when Nicole Williamson, he did, like, that famous Hamlet, which I saw as a kid, and which was, like, all the levels, and it was really an incredible performance. So it could have been one of those things of, well, he's such a good actor.
Sure,
he can do anything. But I agree with you that it felt like it is such a quintessentially American movie.
Yeah.
And all of those archetypes of all those guys in that are such, it feels like you're watching a Platoon, right? From a World War II movie, right? Here's the guy from Brooklyn, here's the guy from the Northeast, right? Here's the Southerner, like all of those types. Mm-hmm. To have anybody other than Keach now is obviously unthinkable.
Yeah, it's indelible. But and also, though, it must have helped him for the performance to have him parachuted in, because the rest of the actors would have figured out who they were together, and then there's this outsider, there's this invader.
Yeah. Yeah, so it feels like one of those things where I would imagine that because certainly I've never heard, like, people complaining about the making of the movie. Never, like, all the actors who ever get talked to about it always say, well, yeah, it was a tense experience or whatever, but and, you know, there are stories, some of which we can't tell you, but in the end, it looks like one of those experiences probably where you get dropped in, you go crazy for a little while, you come out, and then you I mean, who knows what you expect to end up with. I don't know if anybody would have expected to end it up with this, but you know, thank God they did.
Yeah, and what this is different every time, because of course it wasn't finished when it came out. There were, like, that wasn't the end of it. There were new cuts and different versions.
I don't think I've ever seen any of the different How different are they? Have you seen any of them?
The one that we would have, the one that was on cable anyway, the one we first would have seen is shorter.
Oh, okay,
but not by much. It might be 6 or 7 minutes.
Okay,
and it may also simply be a lot of organization.
Okay.
Like, things are cut differently. I remember the rhythm feels different now.
Oh, really?
But I couldn't tell you how. That's the problem. And I don't know that any of the earlier editions have survived. The home video version that was released on VHS is probably different from the DVD cut.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to figure out if they never really go into the director's cut aspect of it in the packaging here.
Right.
But when it was released on... I don't think it was ever released on disc as Killer Kane.
No, right? No. Twinkle, it was...
The name was reclaimed.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so... I mean, the title itself, just the picking that, it's so queer. It's such a weird and very compelling thing. But then you hear, like, what does it have to do other than, I guess, with just the improbability of life and therefore of faith?
Yeah.
Which
sounds vaguely like a horror movie this way.
Yes, maybe that's what it is.
That's really all it is.
Right, yeah, absolutely, right. Yeah, what are the first 8? Oh, this is the one. Yeah, exactly.
No, I don't know the first 8 configurations. I'm coming up to
exactly.
This. So here, according to... Yes, here we go. According to DVD Compare, they're very handy trivia site.
I have to look that up then. I've never used that site before.
I'm going to quote directly. Over the years, there have been no less than 5 different cuts of this film released, with various running times from 99 minutes up to 140. Blatty disowned all versions except one. His approved cut runs 118 minutes and is the version that was originally released to theaters in the U.S. This is also the version currently available on DVD.
There it is. That's the one.
And Blu-ray as well, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
So I mean, if you've seen it since, you have seen his cut.
Yeah, because that's the one that I saw, that I've been watching. It didn't feel really different from the one I had on my bootleg tape. But as you said, it's one of those things where, you know, you move this around, move that around. It probably meant a lot to him. To me, it was, you know, the structure is a very clear kind of, you know, 3-part structure of he arrives into this craziness. There is the middle part, which is, you know, this ongoing debate of faith, along with lots of other lunacy, until the moment when it is revealed what his real identity is, and then a short, dirty third where, you know, everything goes to hell, but you know, the answers come. So, and that's always been. So whatever was moved around, I don't feel like I the version I saw when I first started was all that different.
Yeah, it's probably like a Flashdance situation where when they were cutting it, the sequences could be moved around in any given, as long as you're within the first 45 minutes or the middle 40. Yeah, it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is that just the second you started breaking down the act structure, it's like, yeah, it's a film noir, it's a pulp detective novel.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
That's the other thing it is. It's it's Shutter Island, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
A bunch of other things where people are just, the investigator is the unreliable narrator, is the subject, is the fly in his own trap. But that structure makes it instantly understandable, even though the approach is really baroque and different and unconventional.
Yes.
We can still sort of hook on to the idea of this man is having conversations with people to get to an essential truth.
Yes.
And then the other theme, the faith theme, emerges. And for me, the first time I watched it, it felt like a really weird digression. And then subsequently, it's like, oh no, of course that's what William Blatty, that's the only reason he's making this movie. That's why I'm here.
Exactly.
So he can have this debate in front of me.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it feels like he and I think you're absolutely right. It's funny, I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. It does have that detective structure, that sense of hidden, and right from the get-go, something's up with him because clearly he's weird, and Flanders is acting weird too, and there's the little hints that something is up, although you're not quite sure exactly what the connection is. But you're absolutely right. So, I think that's probably another example of Blatty being a professional writer, having come up that he had to make it entertaining. I mean, as crazy as it is. It's still profoundly entertaining.
Yeah,
there is no moment where you go, I'm bored. You may be confounded and go, I don't know what I'm watching. But it's always fascinating to watch. I mean, it struck me watching the new Twin Peaks, which I really enjoyed. And because I had forgotten how much I'd missed being in Lynch's mind. And he's just one of those guys that can take you right in. Yeah. I have no idea. It's... as a digression, but it's not... have you watched it? Did you watch it?
Not yet, no.
So you can't really spoil Lynch at all.
No, I assume, 4 episodes in and we're no closer to any answers.
No, and it isn't about answers, as it never really was. Mm-hmm. What was surprising to me is that it's not yet about Twin Peaks either.
Okay.
The majority of the story takes place elsewhere. And is far more like the beginning of Fire Walk With Me in terms of its, not so much its brutality, but in terms of its, how is this all, I'm sure it will be. I see echoes of it, but it is clearly Lynch working through stuff that he wants to deal with, and maybe eventually, so it will never have the, what I think always hit people, understandably, with the original Twin Peaks, and I was rewatching that again with my kids as well, and being struck by, okay, I get why it was so popular. And it really, the murder mystery was one thing, but it was classic television. Here is a town you'd like to live in. Here is a place that has its own rules and ethos and mysteries and stories, but it is fundamentally a place I want to spend my week for an hour every weekend. I want to go there. And this new series is not that. It is decidedly not that. And that's fine to me because, again, I trust him. And bringing back to the point of it was, it's so entertaining, and that Lynch can do things like looking at just a clear classic shot of a sofa against a brick wall and make it seem weird and compelling, and that he has still that showman's desire to always engage you. Right, it's never about boring you, and that was the same thing I found with Ninth Configuration, is that it so wants to entertain you, even while it's going nuts and crazy and stuff. And even when it comes down, I mean, what was interesting to me, because I started to compare, I was like, okay, how does it compare to the other two films in this kind of unintended trilogy? Mm-hmm. And, Exorcist, which, I think is in so many ways, I mean, not that we have to make a comparison, but Exorcist is a fundamentally different experience because that is a full and complete movie that also knows exactly what it is. It's right in the pocket. Blatty, and Friedkin, never made better. It's kind of a perfect movie. And while it certainly has that question of faith in it, and Karras's story, it is, like you said, it's the realization that the girl was just the way for the devil to try to convince Karras that this is all bullshit and to despair. and he wins by saying no and by sacrificing himself. And so, but that discussion is very underneath the surface.
Yeah, it's not what the movie's about.
Exactly, and it's certainly not the way he tells the story. And really, like, it's fun. I really love the director's cut of Exorcist.
Oh, yeah.
Because it has what I think is one of the most important scenes in the movie that they didn't put. And it's just a scene after one of the brutal Exorcist scenes where it's Karis and
the conversation.
And they're just sitting outside on the stairs.
That's right.
And it's just a moment of really... And that's where it's the lowest moment. That is the moment of despair. That is the moment of, are we going to be able to do this, you know? And so and Blatty made a big point of, like, that should be in there. And so I'm so glad they put it back, because it was, but that's as much as the movie wants to get into that stuff. And then you go, you know, and then you've got the discussions in here, and then, you know, Exorcist III, which to me has always been, and, you know, because of, I guess it's, troubled production history,
right,
you know, was like such a strong opening and strong middle, and then just kind of loses it at the end, and unfortunately will never be able to probably be the movie.
Have you seen that
he intended it? Is there an actual other cut? Okay.
Shout Factory reconstructed it just last year. Under Scream Factories.
Okay.
They had to use pieces of a VHS cassette
version,
like Blatty's dub, basically.
I would love to check that out and see. Does it work better?
It doesn't work worse.
Okay.
It's still... It boils the story down. I mean, it never gets bigger.
Yeah.
In a way that...
Right.
After that sequence in the hospital, which is the single take nightmare of all nightmares.
Right.
The film kind of never hits that high again. Exactly. And the exorcism sequence, as unnecessary as it is dramatically, is a kind of way to get that up again.
Sure.
And in Blatty's version, it peaks and then it just sort of settles.
Yes.
And it's kind of the same way the Ninth Configuration plays, where it's peak, 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 peak.
Yeah.
And the high at the end is just a sort of a realization rather than a catharsis.
Right.
Because you've been watching catharsis for 2 hours.
Right.
In Exorcist III, it's more of a, well, we know all the cards are on the table now. We know who everybody is. That's the solution. Let's go home.
And I feel like the problem with Exorcist III, and I was watching it again, and you know, again when after he died, and I watched basically this trilogy, and I was struck by how much more successful Ninth Configuration is than Exorcist III in playing out that argument,
right,
and finding then a solution, because I couldn't really explain to you how. And honestly, in a weird way, while I understand why he kills Ned Flanders when he does in Exorcist III to kind of put poor George C. Scott on his own,
right,
it really takes away from, you know, the kind of debate. Like, I wished he had done a scene where it could have been Flanders, Scott, and Dourif in a scene together, so you could have seen that argument, because that felt like that was the debate that you wanted to have.
Right.
And then you could have, you know, but he killed him early, and or at least earlier, so that it just became Scott. And I couldn't really explain to you what revelation occurs at the end that really proves or disproves anything, in the way that The Exorcist clearly states the devil does not win because of Karis' sacrifice, and in the way in this one, you know, Scott Wilson is freed of his fear because of the sacrifice made by Cain.
Right. Yeah.
And Exorcist III just feels like, and there's so much that I really love about Exorcist III, but once it gets into, once Flanders is gone, and after, like you said, the nightmare to end all nightmares, I don't quite know what that movie is anymore.
Yeah. It felt to me in a weird way like Blatty was just saying once and for all, like, I'm done with this conversation.
Right.
By having Kinderman just say that.
Yeah.
Like, I believe in you. Shut up. Leave me alone. I get it. There's a devil.
Right.
And maybe that's part of it. That
that's interesting,
the devil who doesn't actually appear in Exorcist III.
Yeah.
It's a minion and all that. The Gemini just gets to slink off and be pissed off about it.
Yeah.
And his reign of terror ends, but it's really just a strange, spiteful kind of evil that just says, pay attention to me.
Yes.
I didn't get my due. And I get that, because that comes from the same small, pissy world of Georgetown in The Exorcist. Like, where everybody's just sort of... It made so much more sense on the page.
Yes.
In Legion as an extension of that story. Because, everybody is concerned with status and respect.
Yeah.
And Kinderman he never cared about any of that, and he's the last person you'd want to be in a room with someone who demands obeisance.
Yes.
And it just doesn't play when you turn it into a movie because conflict has to come from the outside.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it's funny because, I'd never really picked up on that as an undercurrent. And I never read the book.
Oh, the book's great. The book is a fun read.
Yeah. No, I'd heard. And, but yeah, all of my Blatty I read The Exorcist. And it was interesting. The Exorcist was one of those books where it adds a bunch of stuff that you watch the movie and go, didn't need it. Yeah. The movie gets to exactly... I mean, I was saying about The Exorcist, the thing that struck me was the difference of watching The Exorcist, just for me personally, before I had kids and after. Because before I had kids, to me, The Exorcist was a scary movie about, obviously, possession and these poor priests and fighting this devil. And afterwards, and I remember I got to see The Exorcist when they re-released it, and so I went to see it in the theater, and two things, and I just had my first kid, and the two things that struck me was, A, the sound was much louder than I'd ever thought. It was like watching Taxi Driver the first time.
Yeah, it's really assaultive.
It is. And the scene that got me was the Spinal Tap scene.
Yeah. How
loud and how shocking it is, and I realized, that's the other horror movie. It's your child is sick and you can't fix it.
Yeah.
And it's funny how that hadn't really struck me. And even reading the book, I don't think was really that much of a thing for him. I think that was what Friedkin probably brought to it or whatever, in terms of it being also just that terror. Maybe it's also just Ellen Burstyn's incredible performance.
And it's the fact that that's the only time that Regan is screaming.
She's
in agony.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everybody feels it. The first time I saw it with an audience would have been in the 80s, and it was the original 73 cut.
Okay, yeah.
And it was at the Blu-ray, I guess.
Yeah.
And people were just you could feel the whole room go, when that needle shows up.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, I mean, I don't have kids, but to understand, you see it as an adult and realize, of course.
Yeah, and I think it's probably just also getting older, right? I think because as a kid you kind of somewhat associate with Regan, but I think really you associate with the priests. They're the ones who are going to save.
They're the heroes.
So they're the heroes, right? And I think as you get older and you start to go, look, that is also a story of a parent, and so again, why I think it makes sense why in The Exorcist that big debate, which is certainly much bigger in the book, of faith and evil and what is the point of faith in a world where this kind of evil exists, is kind of subsumed into the story in that great way that a great director and filmmaker can say, no, trust your story here.
Yeah.
But it's great to see in Ninth Configuration him going, no, but I get to now do what I want, and I'm going to put those debates in here. But he gives them to two great performers and gives them, obviously the best one is the foot, right? It's the debate over whether, if God is just a big all-knowing foot, and why not? And what is the foot doing? And it's great, and it's perfect, and it has the irreverence of a truly a truly faithful person would have, that Blatty has, that is like, he's willing to, it's like, in my experience, the guys that you want to have the most interesting debates about God with are priests, are the faithful, who have to confront the doubt in order to get to the part where they're saying, but I have faith.
Right.
So it does not make them afraid. They don't have the evangelist's fear of the questioning. Right. That's part of the deal, is you have to, if you're not questioning it, your faith, what does your faith mean? And Blatty brings that. And Ninth Configuration, there is no point where you feel like, and that's what's great about the way Kane deals with him, is that his questioning is accepted, right? To the point where he lets him wear his little girl's dress to the church and doesn't scold him when he sits there being a jerk about it, because he knows this is how you get to faith, right? It's a remarkably affirming story as well, which I find very, very powerful.
Yeah, and so this brings us to the closer, which we kind of already addressed a little bit. What of the Ninth Configuration have you borrowed or lifted or referenced, or is any of it in your creative DNA? Yeah,
I mean, and I definitely was thinking about that. I was like, okay, well, usually if something really affects you, what was it? And I think there are some structural things that I definitely realize now I really like. And it's something that I had always only associated with Altman, but now I see I was probably just as much from it. It's that background dialogue that carries themes and little bits and pieces. That there is, and so in script writing, it comes down to what I always love to do is giving those moments and giving those little asides, ideally to secondary characters, so that what it feels like in a scene is that it's never that there is 2 stars and then just a bunch of extras.
Right.
That you're trying to build a sense of a world. And I think what was so amazing, and what I know when I sit down to tackle something, every time you sit down to write a scene for the first time, you are building a world, right, that exists in here, and being able to see it completely so that it almost like it feels like, let's say I were to move the camera over here, there's something interesting, or move the camera over here, there's something interesting.
Right.
And that's always the way I've thought about it. And there's a density and a depth to this that I absolutely love. And then, honestly, it's ideally, I think, I realized that his real, and I mean, the danger of it can be lapse into earnestness, but what we're talking about is his ability to raise just some real heady themes and talk about some very abstract concepts, which need to be discussed as abstract concepts, in an entertaining way that still maintains the rules of drama, which is, 2 or more people who want conflicting things and who are going to bash into each other, and the scene will not be over until one of them or both of them gets or doesn't get what they want,
right,
is all there. And so I think that was the other thing that really struck me, was that, every time I am writing, one of my first questions that bedevils me, and I hope to get to eventually, is, what is this about? That it is, it was interesting. I heard Vince Gilligan talking about at one point doing something with Michael Mann, and he started talking about the themes of the thing they were working on, and Michael Mann was like, themes, shmemes, those are just for, professors in jackets. What's the story? And on the one hand, I get that, and on the other hand, I call bullshit. Because Michael Mann is one of the most thematically consistent and compelling filmmakers. Now, maybe he doesn't think about it, right, or maybe he has to tell himself, if I don't think about it, then it comes out naturally, which is great, and that's probably a more ideal way than, thinking about it too much and then shoving it in too much. But in the end, themes are what what we're trying to do here, obviously, are tell stories about things, right? That are, if we want something to last.
Yeah.
And it felt like Blatty and Ninth Configuration, nailed it. Even as weird as it is and as crazy, and as you said, some people will watch it and don't know what to do with it, other people watch it and love it. But I think in large part it's because those themes, whether you're Christian, religious or not, are profoundly compelling and done in an entertaining way. And so I think for me that is something to aspire to. Right. And which I would love to be able to say, at times, I've been able to achieve.
Is there a thing that you would want to direct people to that best reflects that? I mean,
of my own stuff?
Yeah, is there something that jumps out?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I'll be honest, obviously we're here, this will come out, I guess, around the time that Killjoys comes out, sure. And I think the stuff that I've done on Killjoys, and I would say, in the first season, I got to do a straight up horror story. So it was episode 5, called A Glitch in the System. That is it was my chance to do. The great thing about TV is it gives you a chance to redo movies that you feel like that was really great, but then this part went wrong.
Right.
So I got to do Event Horizon. But without the parts that I thought weren't working as well. But, haunted spaceship and crazy guy. But it was also a story of what happens when you no longer have the purpose, especially as a soldier, when you no longer have the purpose that you need. And in a way, now as I'm just thinking about it, actually it has, in terms of that, it is about military men.
A little bit.
And craziness. And realizing that, that you don't know who you are. So all of that stuff actually kind of fits. And I think it's but hopefully done in an entertaining, horror movie way that feels like it's not so heavy on the theme that you feel like you're getting a lesson. So I think that'd be a great one to watch, for sure.
That's the stuff that I love, discovering that, well, not discovering. I love the idea that the inspirations are floating around out there. Like, there are people whose first experience of The Thing was that X-Files episode.
Right, yes.
And then you get to go back and find the real thing.
Yes.
Because your brother or your cousin or your best friend is like, oh, that sucked. This movie does that right.
Yes.
And it's this endless conversation that we have with narrative and with genre tropes and things. And it's always fun to see somebody doing that in a completely different context that just says, hey, I love this thing, you should love it too.
And that's absolutely, and that's what I love about television, or what I love about, and I mean, obviously with Killjoys, you know, in a lot of ways, when we sit down, we go, this is this movie we're doing this movie because it fits with the type of show it is, but also that's just the way our brains work. And you're right, it is a conversation, and it's a chance to do some things differently, and it's a chance to interrogate things, and hopefully if people, but in a way that feels like, if you've seen it, great. If you haven't, hopefully we're going to have some fun. I couldn't imagine having to feel like you have to do everything completely unique and on your own. I know some people are like that, and more power to them, but for me, the fun is being within that thing. And the great thing about genre in general is that you're expected to. That, in fact, that's part of the deal. Yeah. You're not supposed to come in here and completely upend all the apple carts. You're supposed to give us some of those tent poles that we absolutely love.
Right. So, I guess the only other question is, will Foot make an appearance in Killjoy Season 3?
That's a great point.
Is that who they've been chasing?
I have to be honest, we've already shot and filmed it, so I've never even thought, but now you're making me think clearly Season 4. I mean, what's one of the nice things it is about Killjoys that I like, that I think has also, I think about it now, a bit of a connection, is like, while we've certainly never gotten into questions of metaphysics so far as is there or not a god or whatever, but we do have religion as a big part of the show. And one of the fun things for me, and even in the very last episode I just did in 9, where one of the conceits is a ritualistic day and night before war, when everyone has to go about and do a reckoning with people who they either have a problem with or a thank you to say or whatever. And I always really, one of the things I love about sci-fi in general is being able to invent that sort of lore. And in Killjoys, it was great that from the beginning, Michelle had imagined a religious space, which is not something you always get in science fiction. Or oftentimes religion is the one thing that we're like, wow, we have no need, the Star Trek kind of, we're done with that. And, I was always a huge fan of Babylon 5 and J. Michael Straczynski in general, because he was like, that stuff is still at the core of who we are, and will probably be the core of any sentient being, are those metaphysical questions. And we get to do that on Killjoys too, which is really, really nice.
Oh, cool. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
My thanks to Adam Barken, whose work you can enjoy when Killjoys returns for its 3rd season this Friday on June 30th on Syfy in the US and Space in Canada. I've seen the first 2 episodes and they're a lot of fun. Check it out and catch up to the first 2 seasons on Blu-ray, DVD, or the respective Syfy and Space Channel websites. You can find Adam on Twitter at Adam Barken, all one word, and you can find the 9th Configuration on Blu-ray and DVD in an excellent special edition from Hen's Tooth Video. It's also streaming on Shudder. So is The Exorcist III, kind of think of it. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be very kind of you. And if you don't, you risk suffering the wrath of Foot, and nobody wants that. And don't forget to come back Friday for the special bonus episode on The Exorcist III. It's a good one. Thanks for listening.